Okay, so let's talk about the prologue. I want to spend a few minutes picking that apart because, as I said, this is a very important part of the entire story of Job. If you don't have the prologue, and I might add, if you don't understand the prologue, you're not going to understand the story, the rest of the story at all. Or at the very least, you're going to misunderstand or misconstrue the rest of the story such that it really doesn't make sense. Okay, so the prologue, as I said, is chapters 1 and chapter 2. And chapter 1 is very important because it's in the first 5 verses that we get to meet Job and we learn a little bit about who he is. So we see that Job in chapters 1 verses 1 to 5, we learn that Job is a wealthy man, we learn that he's a righteous man, and we learn that he's a family-loving man. Okay, let me unpack these. The text says that Job possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He had a whole lot of servants, very many servants, the text says. And it says that he was the greatest man of all the people of the East. So he's very wealthy. He is the Bill Gates or the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world. He's very wealthy. He's got a lot of stuff, right? So the point, I think, in mentioning this is that Job is someone who lives a very comfortable life. He is someone who doesn't have to worry about where his next meal is coming from. He lives a good life, right? Not only is he wealthy and prosperous, though, he has a wonderful family, a family that he loves. Listen to what verses 4 and 5 says. 4 and 5 say. It says that his sons, Job's sons, used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." So the idea here is that Job loves his family, and he's looking out for them spiritually. He is their spiritual shepherd, one might say. And so Job here is depicted as a man who loves his family. Now this is going to be very important because many members of his family will end up being taken from him. So I think the text is setting up the situation to show the reader that Job loves his family. He's got a good family life. And it seems like, according to the text that we just read, it seems like that their whole family gets along with one another. Every Thanksgiving, right, they enjoy time spent with one another. So not only is Job wealthy and prosperous, he is a family-loving man. But third, Job is also righteous. He's righteous before God. You see this very clearly by the fact that Job acts as a priest almost on behalf of his family. The text that we read says that he would make sacrifices for his family just in case they sinned against God. And this, again, shows us that Job took very seriously his family's spiritual well-being. And I think this serves to help the reader understand that Job was a righteous man. In fact, later on in the text, God himself describes Job as someone who is blameless and upright, someone who fears God and turns away from evil. So Job is someone who is an ideal religious man. His piety is second to none. He's a good man. Again, this is to introduce us to Job so that whenever he does experience suffering and he experiences evil, it's meant to leave the reader scratching their head thinking, my goodness, of all the people that deserve to go through a time of suffering, it's surely not Job. And again, this heightens the situation quite a bit. It elevates the tension between goodness and evil, between good and evil, between God's good plans for his sons and daughters, and the way, on the other hand, that we experience evil and suffering. All right, so that's verses 1 to 5, and it introduces us to Job. The next few verses, namely verses 6 to 12, something happens in the heavenly realm that would change Job's life forever, right? This is really interesting because this, starting in verse 6, you, the reader, me, the reader, we get to peer into the spiritual realm. We get to open up the curtains, as it were, and peek into God's heavenly throne room. And we get to eavesdrop on a conversation that God has with another spiritual being. So this passage is super important, and we're going to pick it apart in this video to help make sense of what's going on, because if we don't pay close attention to it, we may very well misunderstand it. All right, so in starting with verse 6, I'm going to read it, and I'll make some comments along the way. Okay, so verse 6, it says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, before Yahweh. And the Satan also came among them." Let me stop and say some things here. You may be familiar with that phrase, sons of God. It's these sons of God who come into the presence of Yahweh. In fact, it says that they come to present themselves before Yahweh. Now, in the ancient Jewish mind, and in accordance with what we see when we read the Old Testament, we know that Yahweh is the absolute creator of all things. He is the maker of all things. There is none like him. There is no God like him. He is the high king of everything, of all the universe. Yahweh alone is king. The Jews believed in monotheism. That's the idea that there is but one God that they are to worship, right? There is but one sovereign creator. So, who created everything? Yahweh. Who created human beings? Yahweh. Who created spiritual beings? Yahweh. Yahweh is supreme in all things, right? These sons of God are spiritual beings that, again, according to an ancient Jewish mindset or worldview, these sons of God were those spiritual beings that were created by Yahweh to carry out certain functions and duties on behalf of Yahweh. As odd as it may sound, these spiritual beings were enlisted and created by Yahweh in order to help rule and carry out the sovereignty of God. God's sovereign will was often carried out by these divine beings. And here, and there are lots of scriptures that we could point to, and if you're around me a whole lot, you'll know that I've talked about this quite a bit in the past. So anyway, if you're interested in this subject, I would highly recommend a very well-known Old Testament scholar by the name of Michael Heiser. And Dr. Heiser has got some really good things on this subject of the sons of God, or the divine council, right? So go check him out. You'll find him interesting, and I love his work. He's got some good things out there. So these sons of God apparently have a day where they're supposed to come and present themselves before Yahweh. And what are they presenting themselves for? Well, maybe they're there to give a report about all the work they've done, or maybe they're there to get more orders from Yahweh to go off and do his bidding, right? Nonetheless, we have to understand that the sons of God are not equals to Yahweh. They are subservient to Yahweh. They do what Yahweh wants them to do, right? So it says that the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and someone else came along with them. This someone is described as the Satan. Okay. Most English texts are just going to say, and Satan also came among them. In the Hebrew text, it is the word ha-satan, the Satan, lowercase s, ha-satan, the Satan. Satan, the word, means something like accuser, right? Think of a lawyer or something who is accusing another person, a prosecutor. Well, this is who ha-satan is. Now, is ha-satan, the Satan, this person coming along with the sons of God? Who is he? Is he Satan himself that we know of in the New Testament, right? There is a lot of debate about this, and a lot of good Christian scholars go back and forth and agree and disagree on a lot of things regarding this. For me, I definitely think this is a sinister figure. He's not a good person or a good being, spiritual being. He's an evil spiritual being. I do identify him as Satan, the arch enemy of God's people, who is a rebellious spiritual being. I think this is who he is, right? I think that's who it is. So I'm okay with saying Satan, right? But I like to follow the text closely. And so when I say the Satan, all I'm doing there is using the term the way the Hebrew is written, ha-satan, the Satan. Okay.